Hi, this is part 2 of my review featuring Prelude to Woodbury, the Solo Starter Set. If you haven't seen part 1, please check out the link in the description below. In part 2, I will be showing you 3 battle reports of the 3 short scenarios included in the Solo Starter Set. I ask that you please excuse the inconsistent lighting in the screenshots of the battle reports. I had to move some things in my Wargames corner of the room, and the lighting got a bit messed up, but I still hope that you will be able to appreciate how the game proceeds. In the first scenario, the objective is quite simple. You need to search 3 search tokens spread out in the map, and you need to avoid the zombies if possible, or defeat them, of course. When it comes to the story of The Walking Dead, the dead have begun to rise and Brian needs to hide somewhere. He decides to make his way to his parents' empty townhouse to wait for rescue, but he's stopping to scavenge for food on the way. But he's not the only one who's hungry, of course. So this is Brian looking for food, supplies, weapons, etc. in the surrounding area. So now let's begin. During turn 1, Brian runs to the far left token, but because of the noise, the closest zombie moves towards him. Now, Brian is too far away from the other zombies, so they do not close in on him. However, the event card raises the threat and moves the closest zombie towards Brian into contact. And because of that, during the melee phase, the threat goes up again, and Brian must fight these zombies. He chooses to defend and pushes the zombies away with a good roll. During turn 2, Brian searches the token and finds bandages. He then runs between the zombies and stands next to the other token. The closest zombie shambles towards Brian because of the noise he makes while running. He is outside of the kill zone of the other zombies. He draws an event card and a walker moves towards him. During melee, the threat is raised, of course, and Brian defends once again and pushes both walkers away. During turn 3, Brian searches and finds a knife. He sneaks towards the last token. He is just outside of the walker's kill zone. An event card is drawn and the threat is raised again, and the closest walker shambles towards Brian. They fight and Brian stabs the zombie in the head, killing it for good. It's important to keep in mind that, just as I mentioned in the rules explanation of part 1 of this review, the threat goes up at the end of each turn. Now, during turn 4, Brian searches the token and gets another bandage and sneaks away from the walkers. He is outside of the walker's kill zone and the threat goes up, but the end phase comes and Brian wins because he managed to search all 3 search tokens. Now let's move to scenario 2. In scenario 2, things are slightly more complex. Now Brian needs to search 5 tokens, and there are some scenery elements added. In this scenario, Brian is not yet the villainous leader he will become. He lives in the shadow of his brother Philip, who has led the group to the Wilshire Estates, an upper-class gated community. Philip has sent Brian out to explore the streets and come back with something they can use to survive. During turn 1, Brian shoots down the center walker without killing it. The gunshot noise attracts the 2 walkers on the sides. Then Brian sneaks close to the truck on the left. The threat level went up because of the shot. The event card causes one of the walkers to move towards Brian, and the walker that got shot down got up at the end of the turn. During turn 2, Brian searches and finds a hunting knife. Then he sneaks into combat with a walker. The event adds 1 to the threat level. Melee raises the threat again. Brian fights the walker and pushes it back. During turn 3, Brian runs to the side, attracting the attention of the closest walker, but it gets stuck on the truck. Brian holds his nerve, reducing the threat level. The event greatly raises the threat level. During turn 4, Brian sneaks and searches, finds a tire iron, and the event raises the threat level and moves 2 eligible walkers. During turn 5, Brian sneaks and searches, and finds bandages. A walker engages him in melee. The event raises the threat greatly. All walkers move towards Brian, and the walker enters play. Brian kills the walker with his tire iron. During turn 6, Brian runs to the right, but attracts a walker. The event raises the threat to maximum level. Brian knocks the walker down. During turn 7, Brian sneaks and searches and is suddenly attacked by a lurking walker, but he defends well and suffers no wounds. The event card moves the walkers closer to Brian, and a new walker enters play. Brian kills one of the walkers. During turn 8, Brian sneaks past the walkers and searches, finding bandages. A walker rushes at him. The event causes two walkers to move closer. During melee, Brian knocks down the walker in front of him. During turn 9, Brian runs past the walkers and successfully exits the map. Now, for scenario 3, this scenario can get a bit swingy. Some players say that it's a bit difficult, some others say that it's actually too easy. So it's a very random scenario in my opinion, although there are some tactics that you can employ to minimize the circumstances brought about by the randomness. In this scenario, Brian's brother Philip is dead, and Brian has become the leader of Woodbury. However, he needs a way to inspire loyalty in his people. He has discovered that they love the spectacle of arena combat, with the added threat of chained walkers. But of course that means that someone has to chain them up in the first place. To win this scenario, Brian needs to capture 4 walkers and drag them into the truck before the threat tracker reaches the maximum level. During turn 1, Brian sneaks towards a walker and engages it in combat. The event card raises the threat. Melee also raises the threat. Brian fights the walker and defeats it. The walker is now captured. Brian sneaks to the truck and puts the walker on the back of it. An event card causes the walkers to shamble towards Brian, and a new walker enters play. This event and melee raises the threat. Brian fights the walker but loses that round. He discards his jacket to avoid taking damage. During turn 3, Brian moves into contact with the walker, and an event card causes a walker to join in the melee. Brian wins the melee, killing one walker and capturing the other. During turn 4, Brian deposits the other walker in the truck, and the event card raises the threat by 3. Now, Brian is really in danger. This random event card has caused the scenario to speed ahead too much. It's almost time for it to be over, and Brian still needs to capture the remaining walkers. During turn 5, Brian gets into melee with the closest walker. The event raises the threat again and moves the furthest walker towards Brian. The walker wins melee and infects Brian with its bite. There is high threat now. During turn 6, Brian moves and makes noise, luring the closest walker. The event card causes the other walkers to move behind Brian. Brian defeats the walker. His infection deals him 1 damage at the end of the turn. However, Brian loses the scenario because the threat level has reached 18, the maximum threat level. So it's game over for Brian in this scenario. This is actually the first time that I've lost this scenario. Now, what do I think of the Prelude to Woodbury Solo Starter Set? I think this is a must-have for some, but it's quite optional and perhaps even avoidable for some. If you like the miniatures included in this set, if you're looking for accessories for the core Walking Dead All-Out War game, then you're going to love this starter set. But if you're someone who's looking for a fun solo game, this solo starter set could feel a bit lacking. Even if you decide to create your own scenarios or tweak the existing scenarios, I would have preferred it if they added more scenarios, perhaps 6 or 7. The 3 included scenarios are very simple. They feel somewhat bland after playing them once. When it comes to other solo starter sets, like for example the Flintloque starter set, in that game you also have a few scenarios, but you also have free downloadable scenarios and included rules to tweak existing scenarios so you can add a bit more replayability or raise the fun factor when you play them again. So that's the weakest aspect of Prelude to Woodbury. In my case, I really like it because I really like the aspect of the governor's miniature and the zombies. I have other role-playing games, skirmish games, etc., where I'm going to be using these miniatures, but I can imagine that someone who is looking for a good solo experience, albeit a short one, unless that player is more of a casual player or gamer that plays once every 2 weeks or so, the game is going to feel a bit boring after a few plays. It's also important to note that this solo starter set is not necessary to play the Walking Dead All Out War core game as a solo experience. You could skip this one and purchase the normal core set, and you're going to have everything there to play a solo game. However, Prelude to Woodbury contains a solo deck that basically just removes a few cards from the core set that do not work in solo play, and you also have the solo play quick reference. But if I were to get this one, or get one of the two games rather, based on my preferences for a solo game, I would get the core game instead. However, if you're looking for really cool miniatures, additional dice and scenery elements, the customized deck and the quick solo play reference, I highly recommend that you get Prelude to Woodbury. So as you can see, this is a hit or miss sort of set. Some players will definitely get it, some others are going to skip it in favor of the core game. And if you are planning to play the Walking Dead All Out War on the long run, that is, you're going to be playing several games and campaigns, I also think you definitely want to get this Prelude to Woodbury set because it contains the miniature of the governor that is not included in any of the other expansions. Well, thanks for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.